Continuing now with Dave Barry's Class Clown, the memoirs of a professional wise ass. In our last session, we finished Chapter 6, Politics. So now we continue the book with Chapter 7, Books, Music, and Movies. In June of 1984, I got a phone call out of the blue from a woman in Los Angeles named Shirley Wood. She told me she was a talent coordinator for The Tonight Show, and she was thinking about booking me as a guest to be interviewed by, and notice the all caps there, Johnny freaking Carson. She didn't actually shout in capital letters, but that's how it sounded in my brain. Because in 1984, The Carson Show was huge. Everybody watched it, and all the big stars were guests on it. An appearance on The Tonight Show could make a comedian's career. Carson also sometimes had authors on, but usually they were big-name bestsellers, like Truman Capote. I was an extremely small name with 2 published books. The first was a collection of my early newspaper columns called Bad Habits, which had reached a nationwide readership of my mom. My second book was The Taming of the Screw, a modest little paperback published in 1983 by Rodale Press. It was a parody of do-it-yourself manuals for homeowners, full of terrible advice. For example, I said that the best way to fix a clogged commode was to discharge a firearm in it. In fact, I'd wanted the book to be titled Shoot Your Toilet, but somebody at Rodale Press thought that was too crude. My publicity campaign for The Taming of the Screw consisted of going on one local morning talk show on a Philadelphia TV station. This appearance did not cause sales to soar. As far as I could tell, nobody watched it. I'm not sure the cameraman watched it. But somehow, nearly a year later, a tape of that appearance made its way into the hands of Shirley Wood. She auditioned me over the phone by asking me questions about sections of the book, then listening to my attempts to give funny answers. After each answer I gave, she would say either no or okay. She did not laugh once, but somehow she decided I was tonight worthy, and she booked me on the show. So that was my second TV appearance. I went from a local show nobody watched to a national show millions of people watched. The Tonight Show flew me from Philadelphia to Los Angeles and picked me up in a limo. I had never been in a limo. That took me to the studio, where I was ushered to a dressing room with my name on the door. I didn't have to dress. I had flown in the clothes I'd wear on the show, so I just sat around my personal dressing room being nervous until Shirley Wood came in and went over the questions Carson would ask. Then she walked me to the backstage bar and got me a tall glass filled with wine, which she ordered me to drink, which I did. Then I stood around continuing to be nervous for an hour or so, and then I was on The Tonight Show. And here is a picture of Dave Barry with Johnny, and it's captioned, "Me on The Tonight Show with Johnny freaking Carson." It went great. It turned out that Johnny Carson, Prepare for an Insight, was really good at interviewing, as I later wrote about my experience. What everybody asked me later was, "What's Carson like?" The answer is, how the hell would I know? In the entire 7 minutes during which I sat next to him on national television, he did not once lean over and confide in me what he is like. But he was wonderfully professional, I will tell you that. He set me up for all the jokes, and he let me have the laughs. He didn't get the least bit annoyed when, in my eagerness to answer him, I kept interrupting his questions. I mean, he could have said, "Dave, I know that you know these questions inasmuch as you and Shirley Wood discussed them for an hour today, but it's conceivable that some members of the audience may not know them." But he didn't. So after the first minute, I realized I was in good hands and it was going to be fine. And by the end of the show, I was actually enjoying myself, right up until I threw up on Dick Cavett. That was a joke, of course. I did not throw up on Dick Cavett, but I could have. I sat right between him and Johnny Carson. I even had a tiny private moment with Carson in which he joked about the premise of my book. When the segment was done and the red camera light went off, he lit a cigarette, turned to me and said, "I used to try to do it yourself. You can't do shit yourself." Less than 3 hours later, I was sitting in the coach section of a red-eye flight on the way back to Philadelphia, wide awake, surrounded by dozing non-celebrities who were unaware that in their midst was a person who had just been interviewed by Johnny freaking Carson. Many people saw the broadcast of that interview, which definitely sold some books and opened some doors, although not all of these were doors I should have gone through. For example, and I should stop here for a personal observation, I bought this book after seeing Dave Barry interviewed on TV by Bill Maher on Bill Maher's show Real Time. I've read Dave Barry's columns through the years, for decades. I didn't know about this book though, and I thought, after hearing him interviewed by Bill Maher, I thought I'd love to read that book. So I ordered it from Amazon that day or the next day. So those interviews on TV do sell books. Many people saw the broadcast of that interview, which definitely sold some books and opened some doors, although not all of these were doors I should have gone through. For example, I was contacted by a nice couple who owned a hardware store on Cape Cod. They thought my Carson appearance was hilarious, and they wanted me to come to their store and do a book signing event. They were very enthusiastic about this idea. Their theory was that since my book was about home repair, their hardware store customers would love it. It was a perfect fit. I'd sell a lot of books, and if I paid for my transportation up there, they'd pay for part of the cost of the motel. For some reason, most likely because I was an idiot, this sounded like a solid plan to me. So on a Friday, I drove up to Cape Cod, which is not all that close to suburban Philadelphia, and on Saturday, I did an event at the Nice Couples hardware store. They had ordered more than 100 copies of my book, and they had promoted my appearance by taping up a little sign in the store window. They had scheduled me to be there for 4 hours. To the best of my recollection, and I believe I'm being generous, I sold 5 books. It may have been fewer. It turned out that the primary reason why people go to a hardware store is to buy hardware. They're not really in the market for a humor book, even if the author has been on national TV. At first, when customers entered the store, the nice couple would drag them over to me and tell them how hilarious I was on Carson and point out that I had a book for sale. This announcement was inevitably followed by several seconds of awkward silence, which is the sound people make when they're trying to figure out how they can edge away without buying your book. After going through this excruciating experience several times, I asked the nice couple to please stop trying to get random customers to buy my book. I spent the rest of the 4 hours wandering around the store looking at hardware. After a while, I was familiar enough with the stock that when customers mistook me for an employee, this happened several times, I was able to help them find what they were looking for. That's the nature of author celebrity for most authors who aren't Stephen King. There are times when you can actually feel sort of famous, such as when you're being interviewed by Johnny Carson. But there are many more times when you are reminded how far down authors rank in the celebrity ecosystem, as we see in this list. Top 30 celebrity occupations. 1. Taylor Swift. 2. Major movie star such as Tom Cruise. 3. Musical superstar other than Taylor Swift. 4. Star athlete. 5. Kardashian. 6. President of the United States. 7. Major TV star. 8. Elon Musk. 9. Whoever is currently dating Taylor Swift. 10. Stephen King. 11. Celebrity DJ. 12. Major internet influencer you've never heard of but your kids have. 13. Supermodel. 14. Ty, the Geico Gecko and Flo of Progressive Insurance. 15. Celebrity chef. 16. Celebrity fashion designer. 17. Celebrity billionaire other than Elon Musk. 18. Person doing some idiot thing in a viral video. 19. The Pope. 20. Stand-up comedian with a Netflix special. 21. Member of the British royal family. 22. Reality TV show star. 23. The Dalai Lama. 24. Minor movie star such as that guy, what's his name, in that movie. 25. Whoever was previously dating Taylor Swift. 26. Vice President of the United States. 27. TV weather person. 28. Nobel Prize winner. 29. Author other than Stephen King. 30. Member of Congress. As we see, authors rank celebrity-wise below everybody except Congress. That's because compared to other forms of popular entertainment, including professional cornhole, the book industry is small potatoes. How small? Let's look at the numbers. In the book business, it's considered a big deal for a book to make one of the various New York Times bestseller lists. Even if a book barely manages to make it to the bottom of a list and remains on it for only a single week, every piece of publicity associated with that book forever after will declare that it's a New York Times bestseller. I know this because some of my books fall into that category. Guess how many copies a book has to sell in a week to make it onto a Times list? Never mind, I'll tell you. 1,000 books, give or take. That's right. If in a given week the number of people in the entire world who buy your book is slightly less than the average attendance at a single game of the Central California minor league baseball team, the Modesto Nuts, then your book could be a New York Times bestseller. And a footnote says, according to Wikipedia, the average attendance at a Modesto Nuts game in 2023 was 1,259. So every book you sell matters. This is why most authors spend a lot of time and energy promoting their books at the retail level. This is why they go to bookstores, or even, if they are stupid, hardware stores, and do book signing events, despite the risk that few people or even no people will show up. This is why authors obsessively check their rankings on Amazon and become inordinately excited when their book skyrockets from number 63,981 all the way up to 47,828. To be fair, some authors say they never check their Amazon rankings. These authors are lying. This is also why authors go on book tours where they will do anything to sell copies of their book. At least I did. For example, in 1996, I was in St. Louis on a book tour when I got a call from a producer on the Oprah Winfrey Show. This was a very exciting call for me, ranking up there with the Tonight Show call, because Oprah sold a ton of books. Any book she chose for her book club instantly became a bestseller. I wasn't being considered for that honor, of course. Oprah's club was for serious, important books that did not contain booger jokes. But just having a book mentioned by Oprah on her show was a big deal for an author. The producer said she was interested in having me be part of the guest panel for a show the following day. The theme of the show was Things We Do in Secret. We guests would each confess to something we had done wrong and then do something on air to make it right. The producer wanted to know if I had something I could confess to. Of course, I said yes. To get on Oprah's show, I would have claimed sole responsibility for the JFK assassination. But the crime I came up with was theft. Some years earlier, I had stayed at a Hyatt hotel that had a plastic sign in the bathroom which read, "Our towels are 100% cotton. Should you wish to purchase a set, they are available in the gift store. Should you prefer the set in your bathroom, a $75 charge will automatically be added to your bill." This was Hyatt's polite way of saying, if you steal our towels, we'll charge you $75. So I stole the sign. I took it home and put it in our guest bathroom, where it amused guests for several years. When I told this story to the Oprah producer, she said it was perfect. She said I'd tell my story on air, then drop the sign into a give-back box where they'd be collecting things that people had stolen. The producer said it was essential that I return the sign on the air. Okay, I said, no problem. Except there was a problem. I was in St. Louis, the show was in Chicago the next day, and the sign was in Miami. I called Michelle and told her to FedEx the sign to Chicago the fastest possible way, but I wasn't sure it would get there in time. If it didn't, I wasn't sure I'd be on the Oprah show. I was seriously worried about this. Then a realization struck me. I was staying at a Hyatt hotel in St. Louis, and my room had a plastic sign. This one explained the hotel's no smoking policy, but from a distance there would be no way to tell. So I stole that sign. In the end, the original sign made it to Chicago on time, and I returned it on air under the approving gaze of Oprah and her studio audience. But my point is, in order to appear in a show about correcting past wrongdoings, I was perfectly willing to steal again and lie to Oprah. You do what you have to do on a book tour. Several times I went on Bill Maher's show, back when it was called Politically Incorrect, to be on panels debating the serious issues of the day. The entire reason I went on those shows was that they promised to mention my books. I had no special expertise or even strong feelings concerning the issues we discussed. Nevertheless, I went on and debated heatedly, passionately, about issues I did not in fact care much about. I clashed aggressively with the other panelists. At one point, I got into it so much with Vicki Lawrence, the actress and comedian from the Carol Burnett Show, who sang the hit song The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia, that she leaped to her feet and yelled at me because of something I said. I don't remember what I said regarding the death penalty. In a footnote, he adds about Vicki Lawrence and The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia. This song has a complex plot which I've never really understood. So before the Mar show in the green room, I asked Vicki Lawrence what it was about. She replied, "I have absolutely no idea." On another politically incorrect, former Monkees member Mickey Dolenz and I got into a vehement disagreement about something. Again, I don't remember what, only that at the time I felt strongly that it was my job as an author promoting a book to stand up for my beliefs, whatever they were. But mostly what you do on book tours is talk about the book you're trying to sell. You do many interviews in which you say the same things over and over and over, trying to sound enthusiastic, even though deep down inside you're starting to hate your book. Sometimes the people interviewing you have read your book, but much more often they have not. This isn't necessarily their fault. If it's a morning drive radio show where they're squeezing you in with the music, traffic, and weather, or a local TV news broadcast where they're doing 19 other segments, they don't have time to read your book. Sometimes they don't really have time to even talk about your book. I did many interviews with midday TV news anchor persons that went basically like this. With us now is humor author Dave Barry, who has a new book out. Welcome, Dave. Thank you. So, Dave, what's this book about? Computers. Ha ha. Funny stuff. Oh, I'm sorry. Computers. Co-anchor person says. Let me start over here. I better read who's talking. All right. So I did many interviews with midday TV news anchor persons that went basically like this. Anchor person. With us now is humor author Dave Barry, who has a new book out. Welcome, Dave. Me. Thank you. Co-anchor person. So, Dave, what's this book about? Me. Computers. Co-anchor person. Ha ha. Anchor person. Funny stuff. Thank you, Dave Barry. On a more tragic note, a kennel fire has claimed the lives of 53 puppies. For more on that story, we go to... All authors have stories about awkward book tour interviews. My favorite is one that was told to me by the late historian David McCullough. He was on a TV show discussing his book about the Panama Canal, The Path Between the Seas, and the host asked him how he felt about the United States handing the canal over to Panama. David's answer was that regardless of the canal's legal status, it would always, in a sense, belong to the United States, quote, like Normandy Beach. According to David, the interviewer looked puzzled, paused, then said, "I don't understand. Who is Norman D. Beach?" The best part about book tours, as I've said before, but having me read the book to you like this is like having a laugh track. The best part about book tours is meeting the readers, the people who, instead of staying home and watching TV, go to bookstores to see you, pay actual money for your book, stand in line to have you sign them, and almost always act as though you're doing them a favor. Sometimes they even bring gifts. My readers have brought me, among many other things, T-shirts, whoopee cushions, cakes, cookies, Pop-Tarts, Pez dispensers, a coconut brazier, beer, a lot of beer, Slim Jims, Cheez-Its, regular brownies, and some highly irregular brownies, if you catch my drift. In 40 years of book touring, I've signed I don't know how many thousands of copies of my books. I've also signed books by other authors, as well as photos, newspaper clippings, CDs, tapes, Kindles, laptops, shirts, hats, shoes, casts, arms, legs, chests, foreheads, and the diapers of multiple babies. Usually people want me to personalize the books for either themselves or somebody else. Sometimes they also want me to write a special message for the person they're giving the book to, such as "Happy Birthday," or "Keep Laughing," or "You're an Idiot." Occasionally they want me to write some inspirational message that I would never actually say to anybody, like, "Keep striving and you will achieve your dreams." I'll write pretty much anything people want. Hey, it's their book. If they don't care what I write, I'll write "for," followed by their name, "with best wishes," or a deeply and sincere inscription such as "for," name, "my absolute closest personal friend," "for," name, "my idol," For name, without whom I would never have written this book. For name, the mother of my children. I still enjoy getting out and meeting readers, but the era of the multi-city in-person book tour is coming to an end, replaced by social media and virtual events. I'm not sure that book tours have ever been a particularly effective way to sell books anyway. What really sells books is word of mouth, by which I mean women. And I think that's probably a good place to stop. Let me see how much more we have in this chapter. Let's see how far I've gone so far in this chapter. I'll go a little further. So again, when women, what really sells books is word of mouth, by which I mean women. Women read more books, especially novels, than men. Women also are better at sharing their feelings than men, who, I'm generalizing here, but you know I'm right, usually are reluctant to say how they really feel about anything other than past interference. When women like a book, they let people know. That's how books become bestsellers. I've witnessed this process firsthand. Remember the hugely successful novel The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini? That book sold 7 million copies, and I would conservatively estimate that 5 million of those sales were the direct result of pressure from my wife, Michelle, who is a woman. She loved The Kite Runner, and for a period of roughly a year after reading it, she insisted that every human being she encountered in bookstores, on airplanes, in elevators and public restrooms, on the Small World ride at Disney World had to buy it. This is a true story. When our daughter Sophie was 4, her preschool class had a Mother's Day lunch. The teachers had asked the children to describe their moms, then wrote the descriptions on posters taped to the wall. The other moms' posters said things like, "My mom bakes cookies," "My mom plays with me," and "My mom is pretty." Michelle's poster, I swear I did not set Sophie up to do this, said, "My mom tells everyone to read The Kite Runner." I have met Khaled Hosseini. He's a nice guy and a fine writer, but he is not, to the best of my knowledge, married to my wife, whereas I am. Multiple times during Michelle's intensive year-long promotional campaign for The Kite Runner, I asked her if maybe she could, if she had a few spare minutes, make one of my books into a bestseller. Each time, she laughed and assured me that she loves my books too. Then she resumed promoting The Kite Runner. Despite the lack of support from my wife, most of my books have done okay. A couple of them did well enough that a TV producer bought the rights to be used as the basis of the TV sitcom Dave's World, which ran on CBS for 4 seasons in the early 90s. It starred the late Harry Anderson as Dave Barry, a newspaper columnist. That was a weird experience because many people assumed that A, I wrote the show, and B, it resembled my actual life. Neither of these assumptions was correct. The show was written by professional TV writers in Los Angeles, and the plots involved Dave getting into wacky sitcom situations with his family, friends, and colleagues, such as Kenny Beckett, played by Shadoe Stevens, who was Dave's editor at his newspaper, the Miami Record-Dispatch. Often at the end of an episode, Dave would learn a life lesson. My real life was nothing like that. My real life at that time consisted of sitting in a room with 2 dogs and 0 other humans, hour after hour, day after day, staring at a computer screen and thinking, this is not funny. This experience did not teach me any life lessons other than that dogs fart a lot. Also, my real newspaper was the Miami Herald, and my editor was Tom Schroeder, who is far more journalistically qualified than Shadoe Stevens, but has way less hair. I don't mean to be whiny here. I got paid for the book rights, and the Dave's World people were always nice to me. They even flew me out to California in the first season to meet everybody and appear in a cameo role. It was a scene set in an appliance store where 2 guys are competing to buy the last air conditioner during a heat wave. Harry Anderson played me, and I played a person with no acting ability. I really enjoyed hanging out with Harry. He was a funny, smart, very unpretentious guy. He knew I'd played in rock bands, and he had this idea for a bit we'd do together at the end of the episode in which he and I would play Wild Thing on guitars. Harry didn't play guitar. He had practiced the chords for maybe 15 minutes, but even for Wild Thing, that's not really enough. In the episode, as the end credits are rolling, Harry and I play a verse and a chorus together on our guitars. Then I stop playing and say, "Take it." Harry then takes a solo, which is unquestionably the worst rendition of Wild Thing ever recorded. After maybe 10 seconds, I stop him and say, "Okay, give it back." So that was fun. But I was relieved when Dave's World ended its run because, as I say, it was awkward having this network TV show about a guy with my name living this life that was theoretically based on mine but wasn't really much like it. A few years after Dave's World ended, I wrote my first novel. This came about because of an idea of Tom Schroeder's. He wanted to showcase the many writers with connections to South Florida, so he got 13 of us, Brian Antoni, Edna Buchanan, Tananarive Dew, John Dufresne, James Hall, Vicki Hendricks, Carl Hiaasen, Carolina Hospital, Elmore Leonard, Paul Levine, Evelyn Mayerson, Les Standiford, and me, to collaborate on a serial story published weekly in the Herald Sunday Tropic magazine, with each of us writing a chapter, then handing the story off to the next writer. I wrote the first chapter, which involved a manatee named Booger. Elmore Dutch Leonard wrote the second to last chapter, and Carl Hiaasen heroically wrapped it up. We called it Naked Came the Manatee, in tribute to Naked Came the Stranger, the 1969 parody sex novel written by a group of Newsday staffers. Naked Came the Manatee was not a great work of literature. It had a convoluted and wildly improbable plot involving not one but two severed heads, both allegedly belonging to Fidel Castro. Also, as the story progressed, Booger became increasingly assertive and intelligent, traits not normally associated with manatees, and wound up performing heroic deeds like some kind of big, fat, aquatic lassie. Nevertheless, the project was popular with Tropic readers, and to our astonishment, Neil Nyren, who had been Carl Hiaasen's editor at Putnam, liked it enough to buy it and publish it as an actual book. Carl, Dutch, and I spent a week in New York doing publicity, which was as much fun as I've ever had promoting a book, because we didn't have to take it seriously. The highlight occurred on the Charlie Rose show, when Rose, noticing that Dutch was giving vague answers to his questions, finally asked him point blank, "Have you read this book?" At which point Dutch, Carl, and I collapsed into uncontrollable giggles, because Dutch had not, in fact, read the book. He had delegated that chore to his research assistant, who had given him enough information so that he could write a standalone chapter, thereby passing all responsibility for the plot along to Carl. Dutch Leonard was nobody's fool. Whatever its merits, Naked Came the Manatee actually sold reasonably well. All proceeds went to charity, and Neil Nyren liked my opening chapter enough that he asked me if I'd be interested in writing a novel. Until then, I'd never thought of myself as a novelist. I thought of myself as a joke writer. My columns were basically bunches of jokes. My books were basically larger bunches of jokes. I'd never written anything with what you would call a plot. But Neil was offering me actual money to give it a try. So I wrote Big Trouble. The plot elements included municipal corruption, Russian gangsters selling Soviet military weapons out of a Miami bar, a runaway herd of Santeria sacrificial goats, and people getting high on a psychedelic substance secreted by a toad. I wish I could say these elements sprang from my fertile imagination, but in fact, all of them sprang directly from news stories published in the Miami Herald. Big Trouble came out in 1999. It got pretty good reviews and became a New York Times bestseller, a real one, not a Modesto Nuts one. Then it got made into a movie, which is basically the dream scenario for a first-time novelist, although in my case there was an unexpected twist. The movie was a big-budget, major studio project. It was directed by Barry Sonnenfeld, and it had a big cast of name actors, including Tim Allen, Rene Russo, Sofia Vergara, Stanley Tucci, Zooey Deschanel, Omar Epps, Dennis Farina, Ben Foster, Janine Garofalo, Johnny Knoxville, Jason Lee, Heavy D, Tom Sizemore, and Patrick Warburton. The screenplay was by Robert Ramsey and Matthew Stone. It was filmed in Miami, which was a surreal experience for me, watching my words get converted at tremendous effort and expense into movie sets. For example, in the book, I'd written a scene set in a treehouse. Filming that scene required an army of movie people who descended with a vast fleet of vehicles and tons of equipment on an unsuspecting tree for several long, intense, sometimes frantic days. It was like the Normandy invasion, but with much better catering. And that was just for one scene, which in the movie lasts maybe a minute or two. This process was repeated all over Miami during the summer and fall of 2000. At one point, the production took over a concourse of Miami International Airport for a week, filming a scene wherein a pair of spectacularly incompetent crooks board an airplane carrying a suitcase that they believe contains jewels, but which actually contains a nuclear bomb. The studio spent $40 million making Big Trouble and another $6 million promoting it. Before the planned Hollywood premiere, they held a special advance screening in Miami, which I attended with my family and friends. I went to bed that night feeling pretty excited. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of Michelle urgently calling me to come see what they were showing on TV. It was September 11th, 2001. Not a good time to release a wacky movie comedy, especially one with a suitcase nuke on an airplane. So the release of Big Trouble was postponed. It finally came out quietly in April 2002 with a subdued Hollywood premiere and very minimal publicity. It got mixed to crappy reviews and disappeared from theaters quickly. So it bombed at the box office, though in time it developed a bit of a cult following in cable reruns. There are some people who think it's actually quite good. I think it's fine, but in my mind it's connected with 9/11. This feeling is irrational, but it makes the movie less fun for me to watch. In fact, after the 2002 premiere, I didn't watch it again until 12 years later when I presented it to an audience in St. Petersburg, Russia. To explain how that came about, I'm going to backtrack a bit because the story involves my friend and sometime collaborator Ridley Pearson. I think that's where we'll end. I've gone way over the 20-minute limit. I've gone about 30 minutes because I thought, well, this is a long chapter. I'm going to try to make it in 2 sessions. So we'll stop here, and in the next session, we'll take up right where we left off with him telling the story of him presenting Big Trouble to an audience in St. Petersburg, Russia. So, thank you for watching.